Hello, everyone. We are live and recording. My name is Kellyanne. I'm a Mysterious Galaxy. And tonight I have the pleasure of introducing our lovely authors. Tonight we are hosting Anne Hillerman, discussing her newest book, Stargazer. Stargazer is the latest Leaphorn-Chee-Manuelito novel, which is her 6th book and a continuation of the mystery series written by her father, Tony Hillerman. Tonight, we also have our conversation partner, Caroline Todd, who is one half of the prolific mother and son writing team behind the Inspector Ian Rutledge series and the Bess Crawford series. Before I hand this night off to Caroline and Anne, just going to do a quick little tour of Crowdcast for anyone who hasn't seen one of our virtual events before. If you see on the right-hand side, we're already full of tons of little messages. That's our lovely chat section in which you can say hello to our authors and comment as the conversation goes on this evening. Below our video, you'll see a green button that says Buy Stargazer with signed book plates, and that'll take you directly to the Mysterious Galaxy website and specifically to Stargazer so that you can purchase it, and you will get a signed book plate from Anne with your purchase. And then last but not least, most importantly maybe, is the Ask a Question button even below that. If you click that, you can type any question that you want to ask Anne or Caroline in there, which we highly, highly encourage everyone to do, because it's the best part of virtual events is you get to ask all the questions that you want. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Caroline, and you guys have a great event. I'll see you at the end.
Thank you, Kellyanne. This is great. I wanted to ask you, first of all, how does it feel to have your book pop up on number 7 in the New York Times bestseller list?
Oh my goodness, what a thrill. And what a I'm just so grateful that people love this series. And I have to say, every time that happens, I have to give a shout out to my father. You know, he created the character of Joe Leaphorn more than 50 years ago. And I think it says a lot for his creativity that he gave these characters so much, I don't know what the word is, so much charm and so much energy and so much uniqueness that they have captured readers, you know, ever since my new book. So, and I'm also really grateful that readers have been, readers who loved my dad were willing to give a new kid, Bernadette Manuelito, a chance to become a full-fledged detective. Oh, and Caroline, thank you so much for doing this with me tonight. I love your books. I have to say, I think you and Charles you're among my favorite writers anywhere. So I'm really honored to be doing this with you.
Oh, my pleasure. Let me tell you, I was a great fan of your father's. I think I've read everything that he wrote, including the Moon books. And when he was gone, I was just heartbroken. And you had a career of your own. You were in journalism, and yet you decided to stop and continue the series for him. Yet you've put your own stamp on it. What inspired you to do that? What made you decide to follow in his footsteps?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. There were a lot of factors that led into it, but I think probably the strongest was my experience meeting Dad's fans back in the days when we could actually be in libraries with real people looking us eye to eye instead of using the technology. Anyway, I had done a nonfiction book called Tony Hillerman's Landscape. And as part of that book, my late husband and I drove all around the Navajo Nation. We probably spent a year going to the real places that my dad had featured in his book. And while Don was doing the photos, I would talk to people there, do a little research about Monument Valley or Shiprock or Canyon de Chelly, whatever it was that we were featuring. And so about a year after my dad died, that book came out. And Don and I went on a book tour, and because Don had such beautiful pictures, behind us would be a screen that showed all the landscapes that we'd written about. And then afterwards we would always ask if there were any questions. And inevitably, someone would say, well, I love the series. And did your dad have a book that was almost ready to be published? You know, something that an editor could spruce up, something, somewhere. And I would have to say no. You know, he really took care of business before he died. And then I could just read the disappointment in the face of the person who had asked that question. And very often the person would say, oh, well, I'm going to miss those characters. I love the series. I guess I'll just have to read start from the beginning and read them all over again. And after about maybe 30 or 40th time I heard that, it dawned on me that besides missing my dad, I also was really missing those stories. And the fact that there would be no more was just another heartbreak. So I thought, well, I had never written a mystery, but maybe since I had written nonfiction books and since I had basically grown up with those characters, I thought maybe I could try writing a mystery. So that was sort of that. I think the big thing that gave me the encouragement was just the reaction from Dad's fans, sensing how much they loved the series and how they were longing for more stories.
I know I was. But then I picked up your very first book, and you shot Leaphorn in the first pages, and I thought, oh, she's not going to kill him off. But instead, I gave you a chance to bring Bernie into the story, which was a very, very good idea. I like Bernie. Is she based on anyone, or is she a continuation of your father's character?
Kind of a combination. She is, my father created her, I think, in book 9, and when he first introduces her, she has her unit stuck in the mud. She has to call Jim Chee to rescue her. And she does not do very well as a policewoman in Dad's books, I have to say. And the Dad's second to last book, Skeleton Man, in that book, Bernie is, for most of it, she's acting pretty much like a professional law enforcement person. By almost the end of the book, she's found the bad guys, she's found the stolen diamonds, she's rescued a woman who was in distress. So basically the crime is sort of wrapped up. But then because my dad loved those male characters, there's a flash flood at the bottom of the Grand Canyon and chaos everywhere. And amazingly, Jim Chee shows up, saves Bernie, arrests the bad guys. So after I read that, I talked to my dad and I said, I think your readers really would appreciate seeing Bernie, maybe in your next book, seeing Bernie not get rescued, seeing Bernie rise to the level of Jim Chee and Joe Leaphorn. And there was this pause, and then Dad gave me this cute little smile. He said, oh, honey, what an interesting idea. But really, luckily for me, he didn't think it was interesting enough to actually use it. So then after he died, I thought, well, since I can't be Tony Hillerman, I have to figure out some way to keep the essence of the series alive, but give it my own stamp. And I really thought that Bernie-Manuelito deserved better than my dad had given her. So I thought, even if no one except my mom and me read this book, I still have to write it so Bernie gets to save the day. So yeah, it was Dad had planted the seed, but then I was the one who decided that she would really be good as a major character. So it was sort of a combination of efforts, I guess.
It was a brilliant idea, to carry on the series and change it to put your own stamp on it. That was just marvelous. I mean, I've been to New Mexico. It's bleak, it's dry, it's lonely, isolated in places, and yet it's really a beautiful, beautiful landscape for someone from the East Coast. I find it really, really interesting to follow you through the maps as you take the various roads, see the various monuments, identify where you are. I love that. But do you work with the Navajo Nation Police to write your mysteries?
I have two retired Navajo policemen who work as consultants for me. And so, if I get into an area where I'm not sure how they would handle it, I call up those guys, and they're very generous and very well informed. So they help me with that a little bit. But, and as you know from your own work, Caroline, a lot of it, some of it is true police work, and some of it is imagination. And I try not to mess with real police work, but I think my characters maybe have a little more leeway than the average Navajo policeman in real life would have. And I think that's part of what makes fiction fun. You but you can bend them a little bit if it makes the story better.
And yet you give such a great feel for how they work and what they know about their own culture, how they see things in a different way, perhaps from the way a policeman in Delaware might see them. And you've captured that, again, extremely well. I think this is part of the charm of the books. You've been able to go on with a culture that most people know very little about. I think most people probably know most from your books and your dad's books.
That very well might be true. And it's interesting. It is a whole different approach to law enforcement. It's much less punitive, much less based on punishment, and a lot more based on, let's see what caused this problem and see if we can figure out how to solve it. And I think perhaps our own criminal justice system could learn a little bit that sometimes sending a person who has a drug or alcohol problem, sending them to prison doesn't really help the situation. Whereas in the Navajo culture, there's reconciliation is the word that comes to mind. That's not exactly it, but it's kind of a peacemaking process where sometimes instead of sending a person to jail, he'll get together with the family members who have been impacted by the crime, and he'll apologize to them, and then they'll say, well, I need a new fence. I need somebody to drive my sister to cancer treatment. And they let him kind of make amends to the people who have been hurt by the crime, rather than sending him to court and then sending him to jail. And it just seems really brilliant and compassionate to me. So I admire that a lot.
Well, you see that in Billy's interactions with the characters the people she is interviewing for the inquiry. Now, I have to admit to something. I would sit down and say to myself, I have an hour, I'm going to read a chapter of Stargazer. And the next thing I knew, it was 2 or 3 hours later. You have a way of creating a world. Deborah Crombie does that. Louise Penny does that. But you make this world so alive that the reader is just drawn in. You don't say, well, it's the end of the chapter. I can put this book up for another day or another hour or whatever. There's so much in there that you don't want to draw back. Are you aware of what you're doing there? It's just amazing.
I would like to say no, it's just, spontaneous creativity. But I know that when I'm reading a mystery, I love to get to the end of the chapter and there's something there that just makes me think, oh, well, the dog can wait another half an hour. I've got to read this next chapter. So I think my own background as a reader of mysteries and a lover of mysteries is kind of led to that. And I have to say, you and Charles did the same thing in your mysteries. I find myself, I think, oh, well, one more chapter, and the next thing I know, it's 2 a.m.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is why mysteries have been so popular for so long. People find something in them that they don't find in other things.
I think the other thing, I know as a reader of mysteries, the other thing I like about mysteries is that somehow, and unlike in real life, when you get to the end, justice is served. Usually most of the problems are solved, except, for us who write series where a few of them have to go on so they can be solved in the next book. But so often real life isn't like that. And I think there's just something kind of, I don't know, good for the soul to read a book where in the end, justice is done and the bad guys are relinquished and, all that good stuff that we can do as mystery writers.
That's what P.D. James said. It puts the world back in balance, and it gives you a sense that the world could be in balance no matter what you read in the headlines.
If only our fictional characters were actually at work.
Let's talk a little bit about Stargazer. I'm not going to give anything away, but the Stargazer is an astronomer, which reminds me, I love the covers. His death is not Bernie's case.
I have to brag on my new baby. Sorry.
Not really Bernie's case, and then she becomes involved. And one of the neat things about your stories, I find, is that, for example, Billy can meet a herd of cattle wandering across a lonely road, and you think, oh, that's a nice local car. This is a sense of whiteness. Two chapters later, you begin to realize what that herd of cattle really had to do with the story. You lead people in a very, very, very interesting way of drawing it into something. Here is a simple thing. It becomes more complicated as she goes into that isolated cabin. And this is a technique that I just love to follow. I would be looking for where's the next herd of cattle, even herd. But it's in many ways that's. Do you plot this? Do you plot it out? Do you do what Lee Child called seat of the pants plotting? How do you get all of this put together into a story and bring the parts together like that?
Well, I think that's the magic of it. I don't actually do an outline, but before I start a new book, I write myself a letter, and I try to kind of have a little conversation with myself about what the goal of this new book is, which of the characters is going to drive it, what setting I'm going to use and why that's good, who the bad guy is. So even though it's not exactly an outline, it kind of gives me a framework in which to plant the story. And then I just sort of start writing, and sometimes I like to do a lot of traveling to the sites that I write about, and I know you do that too, although you can't go back in history. But anyway, often when I'm on the Navajo Nation, I'll see things or meet people that will give me ideas that I wasn't even thinking of that just seem to fit perfectly in the book. And of course, the problem with sort of writing in this circular way is that a lot of times I maybe end up at a dead end, or I'll end up in a cul-de-sac, and then I have to figure out, do I just need to delete those 1,000 words, or can I somehow figure out how to incorporate them into the story? And it's fun, and it's a challenge. And I know I admire people who can write from outlines, because I think it's really much more efficient. But my brain just doesn't like it. It likes more the discovery through the actual process of writing. And sometimes I'm surprised. In Stargazer, for instance, I was about 3/4 of the way through the book, and I realized that the character who I thought was the villain was not the villain. Uh-huh. And it was, one of those heart-stopping moments where I thought, am I going to have to go back and redo this? But luckily, another character had been sort of whispering in my ear that character was not as innocent as that character seemed. I'm purposely not using pronouns because I don't want to give anything away here. And so I planted a few more clues for that character and pulled back just a tiny bit on the character who I initially thought was the villain. And I thought, well, if these guys fooled me, maybe they'll fool the readers too. And I have heard from people who've said, yeah, I was really surprised to find out who done it in this book. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, we do the same thing. We don't outline. And as the story goes along, the characters talk to you. You know, I say this to people and they look at me as if I like to tell Jeffrey Deaver that 200 pages of outline are not my cup of tea. I mean, you can see what he was talking about. But the characters do talk to you.
Yeah, they do. They do. And sometimes they yell at you.
Yes.
when I was working on my second book, Rock with Wings, I had thought that Bernie and Chee could solve the crime together. You know, they're both law enforcement people. They're married. They get along well. And for about 3 months, it was just torture. It was awful, 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 awful. And finally, I was out walking with my dog, and she was a very good listener, and I was complaining. And it dawned on me that the problem was that Bernie was yelling at me that she did not want to be a sidekick. After all those books of my dad's in which she was a sidekick, she wanted her own story, and Jim G could solve the crime on his own. And once I stopped, and I know people think this is crazy, but once I listened to her, then I came up with a story for her, and then the book just fell together like magic. It was an amazing experience, and it really taught me not to pretend that I'm not hearing when a character is saying, wait a minute, I need a bigger role, I need a smaller role. I never would have done that. It's interesting, and I think it takes a few books before you really, at least for me it did, before you kind of fine-tune that sense.
There is a sense, but it brings the characters to life. I mean, Bernie is a real person. Even the secondary characters are people because they have lives, they have problems, and it's I think it's because they are so unpredictable that the books come alive so much and draw you in and make you want to follow that world. I mean, I just wish you could write faster.
Me too.
So are you starting on a new book, or are you just relaxing after Stargazer?
Well, I submitted the next novel April 1st. There's probably something bad about sending in a book on April Fool's Day, but anyway, my editor has read it, and she seems to have liked it. I haven't looked at all of her notes, but she's really smart, so I appreciate whatever she has to say. So when I have a few more events on this book tour, and then I'm going to get started on the revisions to that book. And then I have one more book on this Jim Chee, Joe Leaphorn-Chee-Manuelito contract series. So, we'll see what happens. I really am enjoying it. I love working with these characters, and every book is different, and every book is a challenge in a different way.
It is. And I'll have a word with HarperCollins to make sure that contract is renewed.
Okay, good plan.
Do you have a favorite book of so far, the ones you've written? Are they all like your children? Very difficult to pick one over the other.
Well, I thought the one that I just finished, the working title of that is The Sacred Bridge. I thought that one was my favorite, but then because of Stargazer coming out, I had to turn my attention back to Stargazer. And it's like, if you've had a new baby and it's just so precious, and then you realize you have this toddler that you've been kind of neglecting during the pregnancy, and and now she's, babbling at you, and she's got the cute little dimples. So I have to say now Stargazer is my favorite book.
It certainly is a fine book. I mean, not only is the number 7 well deserved, but it also is going to tell the readers that others find this as an exceptional series. I don't know how you're going to keep finding new things. I know we have to do that to ourselves, say, what's new? But that contract's going to be renewed.
Well, thanks. I really am enjoying it. But you know, everything has a natural lifespan, so we'll just have to see what happens. But I have to say, considering that Joe Leaphorn was born probably as a late 20s, early 30s law enforcement guy back in 1970, and he's still working, I think it says a lot for the vigor of these characters, and I think the love that people have for the series. It's wonderful that fictional characters don't have to age the same way that we age. They can still, they can keep working for decades and, never get a gray hair.
I asked Anne Perry once if she regretted making Amphispacia quite as old as she did in the first books, because she keeps on going and she's a wonderful character. And I don't want to see, we'll pretend that Joe really was born in the 40s or 50s, shall we?
Okay.
Is there anything in particular that inspires you to write besides your relationship with your father? Do you find something in writing that is personally very satisfying we spend an awful lot of time alone at a computer writing. What satisfaction do you find in creating these people and telling their story?
Oh, that is such a lovely question. I feel so much gratitude that I'm able to do this. I know a lot of people had real trouble because of the pandemic. And I missed my friends, and I missed, being able to go to movies and all of that stuff. But secretly, part of me was happy that all I had to do, I didn't have to make any apologies for just getting up in the morning and spending all day with my imaginary friends. I love the problem solving part of being a writer. I love, trying to figure out what happens next. And I also love the research. In Stargazer, I had the opportunity to learn so much about an astronomy facility called the Very Large Array, which is in central New Mexico. They're huge telescopes mounted on railroad tracks, and they move them in different configurations depending on what part of the night sky they're listening for it. These telescopes pick up radio waves. Mm-hmm. And so, just that just fascinated me. They were some of the first astronomers to discover black holes. So there was that part of it. And then I was also doing research on Navajo cosmology. And, almost every culture has their own stories of the stars. And it was so fascinating to me to discover just a tiny part of these Navajo stories, and then be able to, try to interweave that into the body of the novel, without giving people a lecture on astronomy or on Navajo stargazing, to sort of just be able to sprinkle it in so it added some interest and some flavor without making people's eyes glaze over. So I think I enjoy storytelling. I enjoy figuring out what happens next. And then I have to say, I enjoy hearing from people who like reading my stories. For me, that's just such a fine reward, to think that these stories have been shared with someone else who has the same kind of quirky imagination that I do.
Well, it certainly is a quirky imagination that appeals to a lot of people.
Well, how about you, Caroline? What is it about writing that charges your batteries?
I can't shut it off. I'm cleaning the bathroom floor and an idea hits me. I'm out working with the flowers or cutting down something in the garden, and an idea hits me. And I have to run into the house and get in touch with Charles and say, "Oh, I just had a brilliant idea. What do you think about it?" And he has to mull it over. And the same thing comes the other way. but it's as if it's always there in the back of your mind. And the movie reel continues whether you're watching it or not. And then all of a sudden, you're aware of something. Oh, this is the answer. We had a suitcase in one book, and we weren't sure what was in the suitcase. And then all of a sudden, one day, it dawned on us. The suitcase had this in it that made a part of the story come alive. So, it's the same thing that you're talking about. It's this idea that somewhere in your brain is this little machine that, like the brain.
That's right. That's exactly how I feel. I know some mornings I cannot wait to get up and get to work. It's just so, and then you have those days where you think, oh my gosh, I should have got an education degree so I could be teaching junior high school, or, days when it's really hard, right? Or days when you think, oh, I'm never going to figure this out. But I think the good thing, having now written 6 books, I have a little more confidence in my ability to figure things out. So I'm not quite as hard on myself as I was on the early books. I sort of take a deep breath and, figure it's going to be okay.
Yes, and it certainly has been so far. Don't change anything.
Okay.
Some questions here. Let me see what's there and what people are wanting to ask you. We've got, first of all, do you feel that inheriting these characters from your father made it easier to write or more difficult? Is there that you feel comes most naturally to you?
Well, could you repeat that second part? The most naturally part?
Is there a character you feel comes most naturally for you?
Okay. Well, first of all, in terms of inheriting the characters, I think mostly I was lucky. Most people, when they are writing a first novel, they have to come up with everything. And I had this built-in cast that I knew them pretty well because I'd been reading, I'd read all of Dad's 18 books. So in a way that was a good thing, but in a way it was a liability, because I thought I have to, if there are characters that I'm not going to change, I have to be sure I really understand them, because a lot of people just like me have read all these books and probably even read them with closer attention. And if I put Jim Chee in a tuxedo, I'm going to get a lot of angry fan mail. So it was, I think, mostly good, but a little daunting. And I have to say, of all the characters, Bernie and Bernie's mom and Darlene are probably the characters who come to me most easily. I think because they were basically the characters that I built up either from scratch or just from a very, very faint outline that my dad had done. And I like Bernie's clan brother, Officer Bigman, too. I mean, because he was another one that I built up from scratch. But I would never say anything bad about Jim Chee or Joe Leaphorn.
Oh, that's wonderful. Just to comment on that, I love Mama.
Oh.
And she's just marvelous. Okay, here's another question. It was similar to the last one. Is there a character of your father's that you resonate the most with?
Oh, that's a hard question. It kind of depends on what I'm writing. In Stargazer, I wanted to give Joe Leaphorn. Joe Leaphorn had the main role in my previous book, The Taleteller. So I didn't want to put him totally on the sidelines. So I was trying to think of what I could do with him. And I remembered years ago, Dad had written a book in which poor Joe has to get in a helicopter, and he's absolutely terrified. But of course he does it because he's, Mr. Law Enforcement. So I thought I could use that little nugget that Dad had planted and do something with it in Stargazer. And so, a lot of times us authors get asked if we will donate naming rights. There's an auction. There was an auction here for to raise money for I think programs that benefit children. And so the gentleman who bought the rights was a doctor, and he was probably in his mid 60s and very well regarded. And he said, well, of all your dad's characters, the one I really liked best was Joe Leaphorn. So when I was writing Stargazer, I had to figure in his name. So I figured out a way that he could be holding hands with Joe Leaphorn. But I'm not going to say anything else. You have to read the book to figure out how I did it. But yeah, it was kind of nice. I was able to bring out a little different side of Joe Leaphorn that my dad had hinted at, but never really developed. So I would say in Stargazer, of all my dad's characters, probably Joe resonated with me the most.
Yes, I love Joe in this. He's marvelous in anything, but I loved him in this. What does a typical writing day look like for each of you? Do you have a routine, or do you work when the inspiration strikes?
I have a routine. When I'm working on a new book, I set aside every morning to do that. And some mornings I have to give myself a lecture because someone will call and say, oh, there's a new restaurant and they have the best croissants I've ever eaten in my life, and let's go. And I have to say, no, sorry, I have to stay here with Bernie and a herd of cows on the road. So, but yeah, I find if I don't have that schedule, I kind of lose my place in the book. My brain really responds to consistency. And then after I get the first draft done, I don't have to be so hard on myself, because then it's just pure joy. Then I'm really excited to get back and make it better. And then since I don't write from an outline, then I can see the shape of the story, and I can see where there's too much of this or that and where I need more of something else. And so, yeah, that's basically my process. When I'm doing a first draft, I really have to stay focused on it every day. Even if it's my birthday, I still have to do a little something. How about you, Caroline? What's your process?
I work mostly when the spirit moves me. I have a Quaker friend who uses that expression, and this certainly fits what I do. Charles works best in the morning, early morning. I work best at night.
Oh.
Sometimes it'll be 2:00 and inspiration is still there. And it becomes 3:00 and 4:00. And then I'm used to the next morning. It's when that is there, it just has to spill out. And so you find yourself going on, and you look at the clock and say, no, just 15 more minutes. And then 15 minutes will pass, and you're still there. And it's an amazing business.
Yeah, it really is.
More organized than I am. Have you read anything recently that you really loved? Somebody else's books?
Excuse me. I've been reading William Kent Krueger, and I really do love his writing. I read this Tinderland, and it was just such a magic book. It's set in the American Depression, and it's kind of based on the Huck Finn story about some children who run away from a terrible orphanage. And he writes so well about all of their adventures. So I've just finished that book. I just finished your book. About the guy who falls off the bridge.
Oh, yeah.
I love that book. I really love that book.
Well, it was the bridge that gave us the story. Yeah, that we would be doing that. But standing up there with only 6 feet for the boat and 6 feet for the horse. They don't use the horse now, but they did in the day of Rutledge's experience. And standing there with just a very thin railing on the horse's side, I thought, this is a perfect place for murder. And this is something that Charles and I have to be very careful of, because once in a while we'll turn to each other and say, you could really, this would be a great place to kill somebody. And that was really sort of let's see. What's your favorite book by your dad?
Oh, that's such a hard question. I love The Thief of Time. I have to say, I think that book was just brilliant. And one of the reasons I like it so much is his portrayal of Emma Leaphorn, Joe Leaphorn's wife, who has just died. And Dad always said that he had trouble writing women characters. But the way he envisions Emma through Leaphorn's eyes, I think is just really, really touching and very, very skillfully done. So I love that book. I love Skinwalkers because I think it's really scary.
Yes, it is.
I love Coyote Waits because and that book in a way influenced me writing Stargazer. One of the themes in Stargazers is lies, and especially the lies that people tell for love or to protect someone, or even maybe not exactly a lie, but something you just never, that's important. That, like some phobia maybe you have that you never get around to telling somebody, and then all of a sudden it comes back and then you're too embarrassed to bring it up. Anyway, in Coyote Waits, my dad has an elderly man confess to murder, like in the first or second chapter. And Jim Chee, of course, doesn't believe this guy could have done it. So poor Jim spends all the rest of the book trying to prove that this guy is innocent. And in the end, he isn't. And I love that book because I thought it was just such a clever plot twist. So that was one of the things that kind of influenced me writing Stargazer.
Yeah, the books you named were excellent. I remember them. And I remember that book with Emma because that was so touching that she did so much to him. And to lose her was difficult.
Yeah. Another book that influenced Stargazer a little bit is a book called Listening Woman that Dad wrote before he'd even invented the Jim Chee character. It was one of his really early books. And in that book, there are some Boy Scouts who were kidnapped and they're kept captive in a cave. And Leaphorn, at this point, Leaphorn is climbing rocks and he's almost caught on fire and he practically gets eaten by a dog. But when he's in that cave, he sees something spectacular. And so in Stargazer, I was able to refer to that a little bit too. So, I really think that my dad is still sending me inspiration. I think, some of these little brainstorms from heaven come down to me. I'm really so grateful to have known him, all my life, and now to be able to let his characters live on.
It is so interesting, having heard you say this, that the books that he wrote are definitely his. The books that you write are definitely yours. And yet, the way the two series, if you can look at them as two series, the way these blend is just so smooth. It's really amazing. I mean, that's why I love the books so much. I haven't lost my favorite characters, but I found new ones. I mean, this is the very best. The last question here is, are you planning any live events? For example, are you going to BoucherCon?
Oh, that's a lovely question. I am going to BoucherCon. BoucherCon this year is in New Orleans in August. And another Southwestern writer, Craig, well, he lives in Wyoming. I guess that's more Western. Anyway, Craig Johnson is going to be the American writer guest of honor. And he asked me if I would interview him. So I'm paying close attention to how skillfully Caroline is doing this, because I know I'm going to do it in New Orleans. So that's a live event. And I'm going to the Western Writers of America conference in June up in Loveland, Colorado. And I'm going to be on a panel up there. And I have an event in Texas. It's called Books on the Bosque, and it's in October. And I have an event in Kearney, Nebraska. It's one of those the library picks a book and the community reads it, and then they invite the author to come and talk. And I'm not exactly sure when that is. And then a biographer he's finished a biography of my dad. I think it's called Tony Hillerman, A Life. And that book is coming out in October. And so he and I are going to do a couple events together. His name is James McGrath Morris, if any of you listening to this are interested. It's really, I have to say, he's a lovely writer. And not only does he tell the story of my dad in more detail than my dad did in his own memoir, but he also mentions my mom and what an important factor she was in my dad's career. So I was happy. I was really happy that he did the book.
Oh, that is really nice. I look forward to that. I had Tony Hillerman's World on order as soon as I knew it was coming out. And you're right, Don did beautiful work there, just beautiful.
Thank you. He did.
And I see that Kellyanne is back to tell us.
Yes, I'm back. Now that we've reached that end of all the questions, thank you guys so much. Thank you to our audience for providing those questions. Really thoughtful. Had a lot of fun tonight.
Thank you, Kellyanne. Thank you for the opportunity. And thanks to everyone who tuned in tonight. I know there's a million other things you all could have been doing. I really appreciate it.
And we do have really great readers at Mysterious Galaxy. So
I have really enjoyed talking to Anne. I've known her for a long time, but there's always something new to learn. Writers are complicated people. So thank you, Anne. I've really had a great time.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Okay, and then just to wrap up tonight, just a reminder, everyone, if you haven't bought Stargazer yet, go ahead and click the green button that says Buy Stargazer with signed book plates so you can get Anne's book signed. It'll be real exciting. And yeah, I think that kind of wraps it up for tonight. Thank you guys both so much for being here. I know it's kind of late, so we'll let you go. And thanks one more time to our audience. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.